Right now, I would like to invite Mr. Jonathan Goldberg, QC, to come and address us on the Holy Land.
Dear friends, brothers and sisters, I am so touched by the honor of speaking to you this morning. Let me tell you just a word about myself. I am an English Queen's Counsel practicing in London and recorder, which is a part-time judge there. Now, a Queen's Counsel is an ancient rank of the most senior barristers, and it dates back many hundreds of years, and it's an honor bestowed by the Queen herself, at least in theory. And my official title is that I'm one of Her Majesty's Counsel learned in the law, and I get to wear I get to wear special robes when I'm in court, almost as wonderful as the robes that Pastor Chris wears. Now, I'm used to public speaking, as you can imagine, but that's in court, and I address maybe 100 or 200 people, not tens of thousands like today, with it going out all over the world. So forgive me if I'm a little nervous. I've had the honor of meeting Queen Elizabeth and indeed Prince Charles and Princess Anne, but I'm not sure that anything compares with the honor I have today to address so many of you. To address so many of you in this amazing place at the invitation of your extraordinary leader and man of God, Pastor Chris. Now, I speak to you today as a proud Jew. There are only 13 million Jews in the world today, 13 million. Before Adolf Hitler and his Holocaust between 1939 and 1945, there were over 19 million Jews in the world. Now, because God appears to have blessed us in certain ways, we're quite talented, some of us, and work quite hard, but in his inscrutable wisdom, he chose to curse us with the Holocaust. And most people imagine we're far more numerous than we are. For example, Nobel Prizes have been awarded in all to about 870 individuals, of whom 185, that's over 21%, were Jewish, although Jews comprise less than 0.2 of the world's population. That's about 1 in every 500 people. So we are, in fact, a tiny people, just 13 million of us now in all the world, of which 7 million live today in the modern state of Israel, which, as you know, has existed only since 1948. Compare that with your great religion of Christianity at over 2.5 billion people, faithful adherents worldwide. Now, my late father of blessed memory was a well-known rabbi in England, and my dear elder brother David is also a famous rabbi. And Jesus, as you all know so well, was also a rabbi, the greatest ever. And that is how his disciples addressed him, rabbi. Rabbi means teacher or master in Hebrew. And Jesus and Paul, of course, were born, lived, and died as Jews. My father, together with a Christian bishop who was his great friend, founded the Council of Christians and Jews, which is today such an important organization in England, bringing together our two great faiths in the manner which Jesus himself would have wished. My father had no difficulty in filling his home with Christian friends and ministers of religion, and he would have been so proud to see me here today. When I was a young boy of 12, shortly before my bar mitzvah, I remember appearing on a television program on the BBC, narrated by my father, about the 23rd Psalm, which I recited by heart in Hebrew. If only my Hebrew were as good today. And a Christian friend of mine from school recited it in English. And that is the way it should be, because we Jews, after all, are your elder sisters. We share the same Father. We worship the same God. We cherish the same civilized values. Both our laws are the Ten Commandments, and our shared Bible is the greatest book ever written. We elder sisters are not jealous of your success or your beauty. We only wish you well. And just as loving sisters should be, we pose no threat and we are not rivals. And even if we bicker a little together occasionally, that is within the family, and it is us against the world. Another dear late friend of mine was a great Bible scholar in England called Rabbi Dr. Sidney Brichto, and he translated the New Testament into English, and he wrote many wonderful books about the genius of Jesus and Paul, a Jewish rabbi. And let me give you this quotation from him, which is amusing. He said, "Jesus and Paul were among the greatest Jewish contributors to civilization ever. The New Testament is full of genius, but it's also Jewish. I don't believe we should distance ourselves from the works of our Jewish boys." In 2015, I had the honor to act as lawyer for your church in London. And afterwards, I asked Pastor Chris, "Have you ever been to visit Israel?" And he replied, "No, it's somehow not worked out for us." And so it was my pleasure to introduce the church, and I want to mention here the wonderful and very hard work of Pastor Karen Victor, from whom you just heard. And it was my pleasure to introduce her and the church to an Israeli lady called Margalit Gordon, who is the best organizer of Christian pilgrimages within Israel. And two enormously successful visits followed by Christ Embassy members to Israel in May 15 and May 16 this year. And I was so proud afterwards when Pastor Chris took me aside and said to me that he wanted to thank me for having changed his life. That is literally what he said to me. He said to me that his life will never be the same again. And this is indeed the overwhelming reaction of all Christian believers who visit Israel. I know that Pastor Chris held a wonderful dialogue here recently in Lagos with another famous pastor, Pastor Benny Hinn from America. So let me read you a short extract of what Pastor Benny Hinn has written about Israel, and I quote, "Israel's renaissance after 2,000 years was nothing short of miraculous," he wrote. "In a tiny country, there is a thriving democracy with its 7.3 million citizens, a world leader in medicine, technology, and agriculture, with a military that ranks amongst the finest. Tiny Israel has given the world the cell phone and computer processors. Israelis have made the barren desert bloom, reforested large portions of the country, and have made the nation a leading exporter of fruit, vegetables, and flowers." He said, "It is vital today that we understand God's blessing on his chosen people and those who stand with that nation." And we, the older sisters, owe so much to you, our wonderful younger sisters, and we gratefully acknowledge it. The greatest friends of our new country, Israel, have been evangelical Christians like yourselves. It would not exist even, and that's a fact, if it were not for evangelical Christians like you, and I want to mention just two of them. The great American president, Harry Truman, who even as a senator was a leading Zionist and a member of the American Christian Committee for Palestine, as Israel was then called, he resisted enormous pressure from other leaders in 1948 in order for America to be the first country in the world to recognize the new infant state of Israel. And historians record that his love for Jews originated in the fact that in his early life he was the owner of a small haberdashery store in Kansas City, Missouri, where his partner was a New York Jew whose family came originally from Lithuania, called Eddie Jacobson. And Truman said that Jacobson was the only man in my life who never once let me down. What a wonderful thing to say about anyone. We should each wish that people may say that about us, shouldn't we? And then the tiny makeshift army of this new fledgling state had to struggle in 1948 to turn back the organized might of 6 Arab armies from the surrounding states who invaded it, with the intention, as they said, of throwing the Jews into the sea. And with the grace of God, but at enormous sacrifice of the blood of their finest young people, they were eventually able to turn back that invasion. And that great Israeli war hero, the one-eyed General Moshe Dayan, I'm sure you've seen photos of him with his eye patch, he acknowledged the new nation's enormous debt to General Ord Wingate. Now, who was he? Wingate was the legendary British Army officer who had trained the Haganah, the underground Jewish army, which is the basis of today's mighty Israeli army. And Moshe Dayan so many times said, and I quote, "It was Wingate who taught us all we know." Now, Wingate was a devout evangelical Christian, just like you, and a military genius who never went anywhere without his Bible in his pocket. The Jewish soldiers serving under him said that Wingate had an encyclopedic knowledge of every hill and every valley and every biblical reference to the Holy Land, as though it were his own backyard. In later years, it was my personal pleasure to meet his younger brother, who was actually a judge in England. And there are so many other examples I could give, if time would permit, of famous evangelical Christians who've made magnificent individual contributions to the dream of the Jewish people to return to Zion. But there are also hundreds of thousands of ordinary evangelical Christians like yourselves all over the world who by your support and your prayers have done so much to bring about the dream of the return to Zion, and who continue that support today in so many ways. And I want you to know that we Jews love and admire you all for it. Those of you who've been on the 2 Christ Embassy missions so far to Israel have witnessed the love and warmth of the welcome you have received there. And they genuinely love you, and they want you there, and they appreciate your defiance of this vile boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And you know that with the possible exception of Dubai, the only country in the entire Middle East today where Christians are not repressed or persecuted and are encouraged to practice their faith freely and in honor and dignity is, of course, Israel. Bethlehem today is situated in the Palestinian territories, and it's sadly a depressed ghost town where the few remaining Christians are almost afraid to breathe. We don't read enough about this fact. Nazareth today, by contrast, is situated in the heart of Israel, and is, as it should be, a thriving, flourishing hub of Christian civilization. For me, one of the most moving moments ever was when I heard Pastor Chris address those of you who were at the farewell dinner, which took place in the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem in May of this year, at the end of your last pilgrimage. And he instructed you in that wonderfully gentle and persuasive manner, which is his unique hallmark, to go back to your different to go back to your different congregations in your different countries and to tell them about the wonderful achievements you had witnessed with your own eyes in Israel, and to combat the lies and slanders that are told about Israel in the press. And I remember Pastor instructed you, and I quote his words, to become, quote, bold new friends of Israel, unquote. But what I have not told anyone before today is that later that evening I happened to go to the lavatory, and there I saw one of the waiters, an elderly, frail man who was washing his face and was crying, and I was worried, and I asked him what the matter was. And he said to me, "I cannot get over that man's speech." He called him that man. He said, "It has made me very emotional. I came here as a 5-year-old boy whose parents were slaughtered by the Nazis." He said, "And it takes a Christian and an African to understand the lies which are being told about us here." So, Pastor, I'm here to tell you how genuinely grateful the ordinary people of Israel are to you and your church. And it's important that you should all know that. Only days ago, we witnessed the obscenity of UNESCO, supposedly the United Nations cultural flagship organization. And they passed a resolution in that world organization denying that there is any Jewish historical connection with the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, at the suit of their paymasters, of course. Well, that's not just obscene, it's absurd. What would Jesus, what would Paul have said if someone had told them there was no Jewish connection to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? This is an attack on you as well as on us. You know as well as I do who those paymasters of UNESCO are. I don't need to spell it out. Brothers and sisters, you know, the scholars tell us that Moses and his wife were black. The Bible tells us that she came from the land of Cush, which scholars say is Ethiopia. And that is how Moses could survive undiscovered as a Jew and live his early life as a prince in Egypt, which is, of course, an African country. And we have the benefit of numerous surviving works of art which show us that the ancient Egyptians amongst whom he lived were similarly dark-skinned. And so many of your ancestors, like my ancestors, have known slavery and persecution and vile inhumanity and degradation. And many of your ancestors, like my ancestors, know what it is to be strangers in a strange land. Truly, we have so much that unites us, and so little that should ever be allowed to come between us. I'm holding in my hand here the program for the first visit by Christ Embassy to Israel 2 years ago, in which I myself had a hand in preparing. And it was entitled Walking in the Footsteps of Jesus. And in 8 days, the sights and sounds which it included from top to bottom of the Holy Land are, as Pastor Karen has told you, simply indescribable. You have to see it to believe it, and it is, as she said, and as Pastor Chris said, a life-changing experience. And the trip, planned to commence next year on May the 14th, 2017, promises to be even more spectacular because it includes some of the great historical sites of neighboring Jordan, which happily is now at peace with Israel, as is Egypt. And I just want to say this to you, by the way, as somebody who's visited Israel countless times with my wife, with my children. Don't believe whatever you read in the press. Safety and security there is total. Israelis are the world experts in it. Sadly, they've had to learn to be. And if you saw the care they take with foreign visitors, respected visitors like you, you'd be amazed. And the trip this year will be 10 days long, and I hope that many, many hundreds, perhaps even thousands of you, perhaps they'll have to do extra visits, that you will come. And I encourage you to sign up early. And the reason particularly is this. Next May is a very busy and important year in Israel, full of tourists, because they're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the famous Balfour Declaration, where the British government first recognized Zionism. And it's also the 60th anniversary of another great event, which is the unification of Jerusalem into one undivided city after the Sixth Day War. So it's vital, I'm told, to make early bookings, and I understand that different groups are being organized for you to cater for different budgets and so forth. And whatever your budget may be, you will find hotels that will amaze you and which are the equal of anywhere in the world. And the food is outstanding in its deliciousness, all organic, all locally grown. And because I see here today, and particularly last night, so many elegant and fashionable ladies, I want to assure them that the shopping in Israel is wonderful too. And let me say just a word about the people. You will find an amazing variety there. You'll see people ranging from the whitest of blondes to the darkest of blacks. And they're all Jews who've been ingathered from all over the world. And it's not for nothing that the word used in Hebrew to describe someone who was born in Israel rather than emigrated there, which is today the majority of the population, they're called a sabra, somebody who was born in the Holy Land. And this Hebrew word has two meanings, because a sabra is also the small cactus which is native to the Holy Land and grows in waterless desert areas. And the sabra is prickly on the outside, which you'll understand it has to be in order to survive at all in those harsh conditions. But when you cut it open, it's also a delicious sweet fruit. And that's a metaphor, because the people are like that, you'll find. And you will see vistas in this tiny country, which you cannot see anywhere else in the world in my experience. You'll see towering skyscrapers situated right next to beautiful green fields growing agriculture and orange groves, all next to the blue sea with the hills of Galilee in the background. And this is all in one view as you move your head around. It's quite extraordinary, and I encourage you to see it with your own eyes. So finally, I want to tell you that meeting and acting for and then getting to know your great pastor, who is, in my personal view, a religious leader of world significance. And through him, getting to meet so many of his respected colleagues who are here today, it's been for me a life-changing experience, I have to tell you. And you all follow his wonderful example, and you're all, those of you I've had the pleasure to meet, you're all such lovely people. In conclusion, brothers and sisters, I nourish a secret dream, which I've shared with Pastor Chris, and now I'm going to share it with you. And my dream is that one day, please God, you may build a church of your own in Israel. And believe me when I say I know, and I've spoken to some very important people in Israel, and they would be delighted with a capital D. And my dream is that you may worship there one day in your own church in the footsteps of Jesus. And what greater tribute to him could there ever be than that? So permit me now to end my remarks to you with the words of the ancient Hebrew benediction from the book of Numbers. And every Jewish father recites this over the heads of his children each Sabbath. And I wish it for you and for all your families. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.